A routine plumbing job turned into an investigation that no one saw coming. What was supposed to be a simple fix for a blocked pipe uncovered something far more sinister. Two cold cases, long forgotten, were about to be solved, and it all started with a rusted metal box hidden behind the walls of an old house. A plumber's discovery would unravel a chilling mystery, exposing secrets that had been buried for decades. Greg Foster had seen his fair share of odd jobs over the years, but nothing could have prepared him for the call he received on that cool autumn morning. Mrs. Abigail Rose, an elderly widow, had called about a blocked pipe in her basement. It was a typical issue for a plumber, and Greg, seasoned in his trade, didn't think twice as he made his way to the house on Maple Street. The house was old, built in the early 1900s, its creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper a testament to the years it had withstood. Mrs. Rose greeted him at the door, her frail hands holding a cup of tea as she ushered him inside. Once in the basement, Greg could tell this wouldn't be a straightforward fix. The pipes were ancient, corroded with age, and clearly in need of replacement. As he started to cut through the drywall to access the pipes, something strange caught his attention. A small, rusted metal box, wedged between two sections of pipe, seemed out of place. It was old, covered in dust and grime, as though it had been hidden there for years. Greg paused, his curiosity piqued. He wasn't one to pry into things that weren't his business, but the box seemed to call to him. He reached for it, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The moment he opened the box, he realized this was no ordinary find. Inside, he discovered a set of photographs, faded and brittle, along with a few pieces of yellowed paper. The images depicted two young women, their faces smiling and carefree. The name Lucy Winters was written on one of the papers, followed by Sarah Hudson. Both women had been missing for decades, and the discovery would lead Greg into a web of secrets and lies no one could have ever imagined. As Greg carefully examined the contents of the box, his hands trembled with an unsettling realization. The photographs inside were old, clearly taken years ago, but they were perfectly preserved, despite the box's age. Two young women stood side by side in the pictures, their faces bright with youthful smiles. They appeared to be friends, possibly more, standing together in front of a familiar landmark, a large stone fountain that sat in the center of town. Greg stared at the images for a long moment, the names written on the yellowed paper beside them slowly registering in his mind. Lucy Winters and Sarah Hudson. He knew those names. In fact, the entire town knew them. Lucy and Sarah had disappeared in the early 1980s under mysterious circumstances. The police had launched an extensive search back then, but neither of the girls were ever found. It had been one of the town's most puzzling cases, leaving families, friends, and even investigators grasping at straws. Over time, the case had gone cold, and eventually people stopped talking about it. But Greg had heard the stories from his grandfather, who had worked as a local police officer at the time. The disappearances had haunted the town for years, and now, here they were, staring back at him from a set of forgotten photographs. His heart began to race. How could these photographs have ended up in a box behind the pipes of an old basement? It didn't make sense. The more he thought about it, the more unsettling the discovery became. This wasn't just a forgotten relic. This was evidence, a link to two young women who had vanished all those years ago. Greg's curiosity was now replaced with a deep sense of unease. He had stumbled upon something that could change everything. Greg couldn't shake the feeling that he had uncovered something far bigger than he initially realized. The photographs of Lucy Winters and Sarah Hudson were no random keepsakes. They were a direct link to a long-forgotten mystery that had plagued the town for decades. After finishing his plumbing job, he found himself driving aimlessly, the box of photographs and papers resting on the passenger seat, the weight of it growing heavier with every mile. His first instinct was to hand over the box to the police, but he hesitated. These were not just old photographs. They were the missing pieces of a puzzle that had remained unsolved for far too long. He thought about his grandfather's stories, about the whispers in town of the two girls vanishing without a trace, leaving behind nothing but empty hope and unanswered questions. The more he looked at the photographs, the more a sense of urgency built inside him. He needed to know what happened to them. He made up his mind and drove straight to the local police station. There, he met with Detective Emma Dawson, a seasoned investigator who had been involved in the case when the girls went missing. She was now the lead detective in the department, but even after all these years, she hadn't been able to find any new leads. When Greg showed her the photographs, Emma's face immediately paled. She recognized the faces of Lucy and Sarah at once. "I remember these girls," she said quietly. "We searched for them everywhere. I never thought we'd get any answers." The discovery was more than just a surprise, it was a lifeline. Emma knew that the pictures were a clue, a key that might unlock the mystery. With new evidence in hand, she made the call to reopen the case, and Greg's simple plumbing job had now ignited a new investigation that would reveal long-buried secrets. Detective Emma Dawson wasted no time once she saw the photographs. The faces of Lucy Winters and Sarah Hudson had haunted her for years. And now, with this new evidence in her hands, a flood of memories and emotions rushed back. The case had been one of her first major investigations when she was a rookie cop, and despite the best efforts of the department, they had never come close to solving it. Over the years, the case had gone cold, pushed aside as new crimes and investigations took priority. But now, with the photographs and the mysterious box Greg had discovered, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Emma immediately pulled the case file from the archives. She flipped through the old notes and witness statements, hoping to find something she had missed all those years ago. The girls had been seen last at a party at a house on Maple Street, hosted by Thomas Avery, a wealthy local businessman with a reputation for being charming and well-connected. His name had come up during the initial investigation, but there had never been enough evidence to link him directly to their disappearances. As Emma read through the file again, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if Avery wasn't just a bystander in this case? What if he was involved? The more she looked into Avery's background, the more disturbing it became. He had a history of being involved with younger women, and some of his former employees had hinted at his darker tendencies. But none of it had ever been concrete enough to bring him in for questioning. Emma knew that reopening the investigation would mean facing a man with influence and power, but the new evidence was enough to justify taking the risk. She contacted her team, and they began digging into Avery's past, hoping to uncover the truth. As the investigation gained momentum, Emma couldn't help but feel that they were on the verge of something big, a revelation that could finally put an end to the mystery of Lucy and Sarah's disappearance. As Emma and her team dug deeper into Thomas Avery's background, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. They discovered that Avery had been one of the town's most respected figures, wealthy, influential, and well-liked by the community. But behind the polished image was a darker side that had been carefully hidden for years. Avery had moved in elite circles, throwing lavish parties at his mansion on Maple Street, often inviting young women, some of whom were just teenagers. The connections he had made with influential people allowed him to remain above suspicion, and his charm kept others from looking too closely. However, as the investigation into his past gained traction, disturbing patterns began to emerge. Former employees and acquaintances, many of whom had never spoken up before, started to come forward. One former employee revealed that Avery had been obsessed with young women, often making unsettling advances on them and becoming increasingly possessive. Others spoke of a hidden room in his mansion, one that no one was allowed to enter. There were rumors, too, that Avery had been seen arguing with both Lucy and Sarah the night they disappeared. Emma knew they had something now, but it wasn't enough to bring Avery in for questioning. They needed solid evidence, and with the new revelations, she and her team began combing through old records, surveillance footage from the area around Avery's home, and the long-forgotten notes from the original investigation. As they pieced together the timeline of Lucy and Sarah's last known moments, they uncovered a shocking truth. Both girls had been seen leaving Avery's party the night they vanished, but they had never made it home. With mounting evidence and the possibility of bringing Avery to justice, Emma finally felt a sense of hope. It was no longer just about solving a cold case. It was about giving Lucy and Sarah the justice they had been denied for so many years. The investigation was gaining momentum, and Avery's dark past was finally coming to light.